Episode 4.
Episode 4.
Fun we're having here on the Warrior's Voice.
We made it this far.
That's right, sir. Coming from the Teufelhunden Tavern here in beautiful Hilton Head Island.
Hoorah!
With our Century Iron Mike looking guard over the top of us. And as all episodes, we are located in a bar just like our ancestor Marines were founded in the Tun Tavern back in 1775. Here we are, Colonel Player, Corporal Green, certainly back in that bar where all the great things happen.
All great things in a bar.
That's right. Well, sir, today I'm really excited about today's episode because we get a chance to not only hear about your book, but more importantly, how quickly this came together. I don't think I've ever heard of a more Marine book than Off the Record. And the reason I share that is how quickly this came together. You know, the Marines are the strike force. Our job is to get there quickly, get things going, and then let the Army and everyone else come in. So why don't you tell us a little bit how you thought about coming up with the idea, first of all, and then I'd love to hear kind of how it got launched.
Well, coming up with the idea, Zach, it goes back to our meeting at Cars and Coffee and just kind of unpacking Zach Green, honestly. And being an entrepreneur, being successful, working on your book, and I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. I've been talking about toying with writing a book before. Public affairs officers, we edit a lot of books. When I was the director of public affairs at Headquarters Marine Corps, I can't tell you the number of books I reviewed, more than 100 books, reviewing them, ensuring that there were no proprietary violations, nothing that would make the Marine Corps look bad. Most of the time it was to ensure that there was factual information there or things were referenced or sourced properly.
And I can say that I know this firsthand because as soon as he heard that I was writing a book, he's like, you might want to send it to me. I'm like, no, I'm good. He's like, no, I'm telling you, you will send it to me, Corporal, and I will review it because if you're using the United States Marine Corps name, that's part of my job is to make sure it's good. So thank goodness I passed.
Absolutely. And I didn't knife hand. So I holstered the knife hand, but
it was coming though, I could tell.
I strongly recommend you let me eyeball it. And Zach did. And there were no violations. Some salty language on some stuff, but there were no violations.
Trying to keep it real.
Absolutely. So in that job, under me as well was the Trademark and Licensing Office. And it was just fascinating the things that have the Marine Corps name on it, what's licensed, what's appropriate, what's authorized. We were probably junior getting into the game of licensing across the board. All the other services that already had it squared away, we were catching up. So with all those things being said, I'm thinking, what book do I want to write? And so there were some fellow public affairs officers who talk the same kind of trash. Oh, I'm going to write a book. Well, what's stopping us? After being encouraged by you, I said, okay, so I want to get it done, and I'm envisioning War and Peace, 70,000 words. But I don't want it as brief as the smallest book or story ever written by Hemingway, For Sale, Baby Shoes, Never Worn. So, what's in the middle? And that's what, Off the Record is all about.
And sir, if I could just interrupt for a second, I think what's so incredible about this discussion is what you said that, everyone talks about it, but how many do it? This podcast is the Warrior's Voice. And the warrior is not somebody that sits back and says, I wish I could have, I should have done it. They get things done. And I think for me, when people talk about the kind of life that I want to live, the kind of life that you want to live, we want to look back on our life and never say, I wish I could have, I wish I would have. Because we never know when that time is. In the business you and I are in, we lose people all the time that didn't know that their ticket was getting ready to get punched. So kudos to you, Colonel. Kudos to you, warrior player, for not just talking about it, but actually making it happen.
Well, Zach, I appreciate that. And to your point, I use General Neller as a reference a lot. He was a commandant. I worked for him when he was Lieutenant General Neller, and he was a big fan of Reference A, which we'll get to later on about the book. But you said, the people that talk about it. New York Times, 81% of people talk about writing a book. 1% actually do.
Wow, I did not know that.
So
now we're in the 1% of Marines, and we're in the 1% of being published authors. I like that.
Outstanding. So from interacting with you, Zach, I went home and everything's on YouTube. Okay, so from my Beetle to my MG, when I'm tinkering on it, everything is on YouTube. And if it's beyond my range and my mechanical expertise, I'll send it to somebody else, let them do it. So I typed in, write a book in a weekend. And what popped up? Chandler Bolt. he did a TED Talk, Youngstown, on what it takes to write a book in a weekend. And he unpacked all the elements. It had 3 pieces: mind map, an outline, and then writing. And as I listened to it, it was about a 15-minute YouTube TED Talk. I said, wait a minute, I think I could go ahead and knock this out. Because I'm not writing War and Peace. I want to write a very specific book. And this one focuses on, my ground rules as a public affairs officer and the things I wish I knew or I had learned, before I became a public affairs officer. Because I started in infantry, and for the needs of the Marine Corps, I transitioned to public affairs. So these were the lessons that I learned that I would hope would help at least one public affairs officer.
And again, just to pause here, I think the hallmark of leadership, John Maxwell is one of my absolute favorite leadership consultants and authors. And he says that a true leader doesn't just lead, but they develop other leaders for you. So I think it's really interesting that your first book, your first process, wasn't written for you. It was written for those other public affair officers going to be rising up in the ranks and teach them how to be better leaders. So
Absolutely.
That's really special.
Thank you, Zach. And it's brief. It was designed, you talked about your book being the #1 bestseller worldwide. For my tiny little lane of audience, I wasn't a #1 bestseller, but I was #1 on Amazon for 45-minute quick reads. And that was my intent. And here's why.
Mission accomplished.
So, Off the Record is a small book, okay? Every Marine who works service with me as a commander is on duty. I'm not forcing any Marines to buy my book. I don't sell my book. I put courtesy copies at every post in my command. And we just roll with it. So this is a small format because everybody has a green monster, and hopefully all my stuff won't fall out of here as I'm showing you. But this is
now. I had a green monster back when I was in. I think they had green monsters back in World War II, and probably going back quite some time. The green monster is basically a notebook that has pretty much been unchanged, and a lot of the duty officers have them, or anything you take notes with.
Absolutely. And my wife got me this for Christmas. It's a leather cover, so as I fill this up with ideas, notes, meeting stuff, okay, it goes with me. The book slides right in the front of it. So no excuse to have PME, professional military education, with you all the time. So as a public affairs officer, you should have a green monster, and these words of wisdom, words of recommendation, words to make you a better officer are right there with you. That's why it's a small format.
Brilliant.
So there's no excuse. So I sit down and say, okay, these are the things that I think would be interesting to fellow Marines, public affairs officers specifically. What would make them better? What were the things that people always argued about as a public affairs officer? And I came up with 10 items. And we can go as in-depth or shallow. I mean, it's a 45-minute read.
Fascinating. I love it. Let's go.
So in the front, dedicated to Megan McClung, my sister in arms. We started in public affairs together. We went through Defense Information School, the public affairs officer course together. Our graduation picture, there are 5 of us in the photo, and Megan and I are in that picture together. Fast forward, several years later, we served together again in Iraq. I promote her to major, and then the day after, she's shipped to Ramadi. And I wanted to go because in Ramadi, a lot of action, a lot of heat, a lot of engagements, enemy engagements. Unfortunately, Megan was killed while she was escorting Fox News, Ollie North. She was escorting Ollie North and his team, and she and 2 Army soldiers were killed. So Megan is my constant reminder that public affairs is a full contact sport. Folks say, okay, they're not in the fight, they're not engaged. Yes, public affairs is front line. Truth, anywhere on the battlefield, you could be done. The battlefield, unfortunately, I don't think it has a left or right lateral limit. It's all over the place.
No more FIBA, it's everywhere. Check.
The forward edge of the battle area has changed. So in that, Megan is a constant reminder to me as a sister in arms, and I do whatever I can in the craft to honor her and to keep our MOS moving forward. So that was the dedication. And then I just go through, the book is broken down with my rules of engagement, my ground rules. And as I was developing it, Zach, some of my pundits, critiques. They were like, well, if you're writing it just for public affairs officers, then those are the only folks who are going to buy it. I've given the book to several civilians, and that's because of my command philosophy. I include that in the front of it. As a commander, I include that as a page. And as the first public affairs commander to have colonel command, I think it's important to share my mindset for, especially in a headquarters and service battalion where I have 400 civilians. These are the things I think you should do in order to be successful, and there's a formula for it, and I put it on every email I send out.
Sir, and I think what was so interesting, I read the book. It's a fantastic book. It's great, obviously, for that small niche within the military public affairs. But I think it goes way further than that. You need to give yourself a little more credit with that. I got so much great jewels and gems from that. But the one thing that really stuck out the most, and I reread this page over and over and over again, is the concept of rhino skin. Would you mind talking a little bit about rhino skin?
So rhino skin, you have rhino skin. I've developed rhino skin over the years. Rhino skin is that, some say water off a duck's back. Rhino skin is you're going to take punches, you're going to take shots. It's part of the job. A rhino doesn't care about the birds pecking on them. They just keep moving. The rhino skin is thick, it's tough, it's durable, and if you want to survive, and I say survive in the profession of public affairs, you've got to have rhino skin.
And again, I think that goes back to the mission, our mission of the Warrior's Voice, and that is iron sharpens iron, and resistance is absolutely crucial to get through those crucibles that you had there, because the rhino skin, they don't come out, the skin does not come out hard like that. No. It comes out soft. It gets developed over time, those calluses and those scars and all that stuff that builds up. So when they're ready to go through their crucible and literally attack it like a Marine, like a rhino, they've got all those licks that prepare them for that crucible. Absolutely. So I think that's a great concept. You really do a well job of articulating in the book.
Thank you. And if there's one thing, looking back, you said you read your book over. I could review mine real quick, but I did the book in 72 hours. And I think that's the part you alluded to earlier.
And he did it without crayons. So for those of you that are in the Marine Corps, that's an accomplishment.
Slow and steady. The outline was done in crayon.
Okay.
But as it developed over the weekend, I went to typing it out. But it was 72 hours. And it was, like I said, not War and Peace. If you're looking at writing a book, what's stopping you? You're stopping you. Because you don't have to write a tome. Just write a small book to get that done. Learn the process, develop what works for you, and then press on to a larger book. What I learned as active duty colonel, that changes, and as a public affairs officer for my career, I know some folks in publishing. So I bounced the idea off of them before I sat down for that 72 hours. And a good buddy of mine, Brian Dories, we worked together on Theater of War, and Theater of War, we bring in actors to read some of the great Greek mythology. And it deals with suicide, mental wellness, sexual assault. No slides, no PowerPoint, no lecture from the commander, but these actors are presenting these very heavy topics, and it allows our Marines to unpack some of those things in a safe environment, and we're just talking and sharing. So I went to Brian and said, hey, brother, this is what I'm thinking about doing. He's like, Riccoh, there's no money in books. And I was crushed. But he's a straight shooter with me. And he said, here's the process. And he said, don't focus on writing your book. Finish your book challenge with your fellow geek public affairs officers. But when you're really ready to write another one, come and see me. You're going to have some street cred because you finished one. And publishers don't want the whole book. They want a summary or the best chapter of your book. And from there, you can go to the table and make a deal. The light bulb went on. I said, okay, roger that. So that took some of the pressure off of me to have a bestseller. It's not about selling books at all. It's about contributing to the Marines coming behind me, as specifically public affairs officers.
That's great.
But the one thing, Zach, if folks take anything away, take my command philosophy, the mantra for success. I'll give it to folks. 3 squared, 2 SIPD, AGNS 7. When Marines saw it by itself, they're like, sir, this is a math problem. And they're like, well, what is this? I said, well, because it's on a piece of paper, one sheet of paper, it's posted throughout the battalion. And because I have 52 sections aboard Parris Island, everything from fire to police, food to shoes, boots, clothes, all that stuff, I'm the city manager. So in my mind, a traditional command philosophy And I've seen several from 1 page to 3 to 5 pages, depending on the rank. Folks don't read it. So you'll see it on the read board. A read board is where everybody goes for the stuff. Don't do this, do that. These are the boundaries for liberty, so on and so forth. So I put my command philosophy up there, it's lost. I put the formula up there, it stands out. If you don't know what it means, it says, go find the sergeant major or go talk to Colonel Player.
And what a great way for you to break some of that barriers down between the non-rates and the senior staff, because that is the ultimate to know that you want to help develop those future leaders by allowing them and giving them the permission to break rank and have that discussion.
Without question, Zach. So here's when I knew folks were listening. The guidance went out. The Marines, on their own, decided to make these.
Wow.
Those are little cards that have the command philosophy on them.
Very interesting.
I didn't want them to do that. They did that on their own.
Initiative.
Yes.
You inspired them.
Own it. But there's a catch. They knew whenever I walked around with the sergeant major, what was the one question I asked them?
What's the formula?
and they reached for the card and said, no problem.
And you know, sir, you also just mentioned something there, just by walking around. I think one of the greatest leadership lessons I learned was just leadership by walking around. Devote time out of every week to getting out of your palace, your little, emerald palace that no one's allowed to touch or see or know what's going on there, and get out there in the trenches with your hogs and get there and hear what's going on. You'll know very quickly the morale, and you'll also be able to find out that cascading message, because you have a message that only goes to the battalion commanders and only to the sergeant majors. You don't know if that message is going to get out there. This is a way for you to tell that message is cascaded all the way down to those non-rates out in the field and other people.
And civilians. And that was the beauty of the formula, of the mantra. And I only asked one question. What's my command philosophy?
So I'm dying to know, what is the formula stand for, sir?
3 squared. 3 square meals a day. Get 3 square meals a day. 2 SI PD. If you're in uniform, 2 SI, 2 hours of self-improvement, professional development. Self-improvement, PT, yoga, bikes, whatever's good for you. Professional development, read something every day. Now, if you're a civilian, same thing, self-improvement. I see civilians walking, whatever low impact, because I have a much older civilian crowd, and that's fine. But the PD is their position description. Every civilian I work with has a position description, and that's my reference A. This is what they legally can and cannot do. Some of them hadn't been updated in 7 to 10 years.
Wow.
So that was knife hand, and with civilians, I'm very cautious. Knife hand to come out, I holster it immediately. But please help me help you and update your position description.
For those not in the military, the knife hand's a pretty powerful tool. Would you mind just giving us a quick refresher on what the knife hand is for people that haven't experienced it?
So I've seen lots of memes. The knife hand, very popular at Paris Island back in the day. I think it's diminished since then, but it's straight hand, straight face, easily transitions from pointing to slapping, which I don't recommend. But it is a piece of gear that you use sparingly.
Right.
I recently used the knife hand in New York. I was there with Adam Driver as we were doing a Arts in the Armed Forces returning to Broadway, and I unleashed the knife hand because it was going to be used to cut the birthday cake. So that's an appropriate time.
There's a great picture of him with Adam, who actually plays Kylo Ren, in Star Wars, and it was the lightsaber versus the knife hand, just like rock, paper, scissors. Knife hand wins every time. So the knife hand, I think, was really exemplified by our infamous General Chaos, or Mad Dog Mattis, as we all call him. You could see him whipping the knife out a couple times out in the White House. That may have cost his early departure because some of those people didn't want to be treated that way. But the other thing I love about the knife hand is when you point your finger, you got 1 finger to you and 3 fingers back to me. When the knife hand comes out, it's all business, baby, because all that stuff's going right to you.
Absolutely. So, Zach, we got 3 squared, 2 SIPD, AGNS. That one stumped a lot of folks. AGNS. You needed, I needed, different for you, different for me, different for Shelly, different for Jen. A good night's sleep. 7 days a week. If you're doing these things, Zach, you're taking care of yourself. You take care of yourself, the mission takes care of itself. That's my command philosophy.
And as we talk about the warrior's voice, it's funny because a lot of those same things are in Warrior Entrepreneur, my book. And the big one there is the connection between mind and body has to be there, the importance of that exercise, and then finally the good night's sleep. You'll find that sleep is the common thread that all entrepreneurs have because they don't get enough sleep. And things really start to fall apart. And the same thing that it's in the military. We force you in the military not to get a good night's sleep. And I remember when I was in the infantry, a lot of stuff you see on the news or in movies, that doesn't really happen in combat. We don't really torture people. We don't do that stuff. We have one simple interrogation technique that works like a charm, has worked out time. Don't sleep. If we can get someone to stand up for prolonged periods of time, not let them sleep, they will tell you anything. They will do anything. It is absolutely makes you dizzy. That is a powerful tool to think that we're using it against our enemy, but then sometimes we're using it against ourselves because we're not getting that good night's sleep.
Absolutely. So, so that's the one thing I would say, take away from the book, take that, the mantra for success. There's some very specifics in there, and if I could go back and redo it, because you had the beauty of having an editor. I was my own editor, and I was blind to some of the typos and some of the other stuff in there, to include the title. One public affairs officer's ground rules. Looking back, I would have, perhaps one colonel's ground rules for life, just to make it more broad, because some things are public affairs specific, but there are others, like the mantra, that are universal, like a fixed or growth mindset, universal. Build relationships, universal. So those were some of the lessons I learned, but the main thing, Zach, was to be an example to my children who are artsy. My oldest son really into music and really, that's a feast or famine, like an entrepreneur. So sometimes you're living well, sometimes it's thin. But to set your mind to a goal, knock it out, set, and what's the next one? Start it and finish it, close that out, go to the next thing.
Again, all great warrior traits, all very transferable warrior traits from the Marines to the other branches of the military to entrepreneurship, or just really to anybody that's out there.
Yes. So, in thinking about it, I guess the last item that I would highlight in there, which is universal, is build relationships. Because as a public affairs officer, that's your bread and butter. In the sense that you name a bad news story, and for me, I don't think there are bad or good news stories. Success looks like a factual, accurate story. And sometimes commanders, now as a commander, we were worried about the good or the bad news. I don't. It is what it is. And Lance Corporal Player will make front page above the fold in a heartbeat, doing something ridiculous. It's just part of the terrain.
Yeah, and today's social media, we see that so much. You have somebody that makes a really unfortunate comment or statement on that weekend, and by Monday they've lost their job. It's on national news. It's trending on Twitter and those other areas. So the importance of public affairs is absolutely critical, not just in the military, but also out in the real world. And it's a lot more relevant today than it was 20, 30 years ago when we didn't have that instant consumption of information and knowledge.
Zach, without question, the landscape can change in a heartbeat. I'll use General Seeley, for example. He was my boss at the Pentagon, because in Marine Public Affairs, we'll have a general as the director of public affairs, and the deputy, who's a trained PAO, kind of running the show. The general signs everything, and that is their job. Tremendous. He got it. He listened to all of my recommendations, guided him through the minefield that is the Pentagon Press Corps, and he really built a relationship and rapport with CNN, ABC, CBS, because they live there every day. He went on to his next job, downrange, some type, because he was an intelligence guy by trade, but as a general, you're generic. But he was in a situation where he developed a document that kind of discussed the way forward while they were deployed. That piece of paper got circulated and bounced all the way back to the Pentagon. And General Milley was asked about the Seeley memo, and the general had no impact, no idea what it was. It made a little bit of a ripple in the media, but because of General Seeley's relationship and rapport with them, the legs weren't as strong as they could have been. So he got it. But that relationship, I think, was a difference maker between his story, getting a little bit of press compared to bouncing and reverberating and going viral, which it could easily have done.
And not what you know, it's who you know.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned the Pentagon. Would you mind, because you have a really intimate experience with the day that changed the lives for all of us. Would you mind talking a little bit about where you were on September 11th, 2001 and kind of what happened?
I usually don't, Zach. But in a nutshell, yes, I was in the building on September 11th, and it was a routine day. You drive. We were living in Woodbridge, Virginia. Get on 95 and go up. Take the trek. Either sharing a ride with someone or taking your own private vehicle. Regular battle rhythm you get into, and I was assigned to the Pentagon Press. What the heck's the name of it? But it's all the junior officers. We called it the pit. I don't know what the official name is, but it was the pit. Captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, and we all would have an account. You would be Africa, Western Hemisphere, or something else. I had at the time Western Hemisphere, NATO, and a couple other accounts. And we're going through. There were no. The landscape of media has changed so much. What we used to do is old school, cut, paste, like papers themselves. Right. Some
Rubber
stuff
cement was your friend. Tape that stuff on the back.
It was a lot slower, a lot more deliberate, not as quick. But you still had to develop the clips for the Secretary of Defense and the key staff. So we're going through that battle rhythm. There was no big screen TV. The TVs now that are the size of your bar, it was something on a desk, maybe that big, and only one in the middle of the pit. So we're going through the battle rhythm, and then on the news pops up the first aircraft hitting a tower. Like, that's tragic. Say a little prayer. Wow, hope everybody's okay. Continue with what I'm doing. The person who had the New York account was busy because of the impact there. Moving forward. Second aircraft, things changed. Something is wrong. The senior, because I was a captain at the time, the senior folks start doing a lot more. I shift over to emergency response team and helping the major with things going on. Things are going, and bang! There's a loud, like a safe hit the ground or something unusual and that. It's like, whoa, what was that? And it wasn't like an explosion or fire immediately or anything, but something happened, and folks looking around, and then the alarms go off. In the Pentagon, it's flashing, the alarm is going, and everybody just get up and go. Let's go. So in the Pentagon, not sure how many folks have been inside, but the middle is hollow, the center courtyard. So we go from our space through the center courtyard, out of the building, and into a parking lot is our designated, if there's a fire drill or whatever, that area. We're all there, everyone's accounted for, and now we see the smoke, because we're on the opposite side of the Pentagon, the smoke is billowing.
Now, do you realize that you were just attacked
no,
yet? Or you
no impact,
just
no
think it's
idea.
Totally coincidental?
Check, maybe there's a fire, something, but there's a fire or something going on over there.
Wow.
Get a head count, and 25, 30 public affairs officers. How many cell phones, Zach?
I imagine they didn't remember to grab them when they were running out the building, did they?
Well, if you had one, you grab it. But out of all of us, not one of us had a cell phone.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Not one.
It's like going to battle without your rifle.
It's like
literally going to battle without your rifle.
So everyone's accounted for. There was one guy, I don't recall his name. He was with one of the safety or security agencies. He had an open line to his wife. He took all of our names and phone numbers. I'm okay. I will touch base with you when I can. And she closed the loop with all of our spouses. From there, I went around to where the impact was, and I saw firsthand where the aircraft.
And how long ago was that from impact?
Maybe a half hour.
Wow. So we're still in a very dynamic.
I mean, we're
situation.
seeing fixed wing going around. We have no comms. Zero.
So we're in war.
Zero comms. Conflict has started, and we're diddy bopping around the building to see the flames and the mass. So I received a knife hand task from Colonel George Rindance. He was the senior military advisor to Tory Clark. She was the and it's all I'm trying to get rid of the acronyms, but she was the senior public affairs officer in the Department of Defense. So I received the knife-hand task to, hey, set up an alternate press briefing room because the Pentagon's on fire. Aye, sir. So I go up the hill, up past Arlington Cemetery, up to Henderson Hall. We used to have a Navy annex as you're going up the hill. Not sure the cardinal directions right now. Up the hill, annex was to the left, the cemetery was to the right. The gate to the cemetery was there, and then there was the Henderson Hall auditorium. I told the MPs, hey, I need that auditorium. Here's the crescent from the Pentagon briefing room. I need to set up this site. Aye, sir. And I set it up. Just a couple of mics. I used all their static equipment that was in there. All good. Told the sentry, gave me, hey, put this in the logbook. It is a special order. On order, this will be used as the Pentagon alternate briefing room. Signed, Captain Player. And then I walked back down the hill and this was maybe 2.5 hours later. I'm walking back down the hill from Henderson Hall to the Pentagon, and I see, just the smoldering of the Pentagon. I get to the bottom of the hill, and the Pentagon press and all of the public affairs officers have set up the Citgo, and that is our press information center. They have food there, they have water, Ms. Clark is there, and that's where all press operations are taking place. And we were there, for the rest of the evening. I probably punched out around about 2300, about 11 p.m. to head home, and hug my wife. The kids were already in bed, and then rinse, repeat, and go back up the hill the following day.
And again, a perfect example of your book, the lessons learned, the communication, how mission essential that was that day, where you could have just worried about yourself and just got in the car and driven home. You could have just said, hey, this is too much, I can't do it. But being the warrior that you are, you took that fear, you used your courage that you learned, and you accomplished your mission, which at that time was absolutely vital because the whole world wanted to know what is happening next. How bad were we hurt? What happened? And you were part of that. So, sir, I salute you. That's incredible. You will be remembered in the history books for time. And I know this is tough for you, but thank you for sharing that with us today.
Zach, you talk about the history part. The alternate site was set up. Secretary Rumsfeld, he said, thank you, good job, but we're going to communicate from the Pentagon. We're going to do the press brief from there. To send the enemy the message, you punched us right in the face. We're still here and we're coming for you. And that's the public affairs on the strategic level that you can geek out on. So
that's tremendous. Sir, anything else you'd like to share with us about Off the Record or your experiences that day?
The last thing, Zach, is of course buy the book.
Where is the book available?
It's available on Amazon. Okay. Or if you Google Off the Record, Riccoh Player Off the Record pops up first, which is great. Those metrics count. The last thing is September 12th. September 12th, we were back in the office, and kind of the area that was impacted, obviously you couldn't go over anywhere near that for several corridors. That was police tape and construction, everything, because it was collapsed. It was not smoldering, but collapsed and dangerous to go there. But we were hammering through our public affairs after action items, and we received word that President Bush was going to come over and thank us. And I was like, being apolitical in uniform, I don't care who it is. President POTUS is the POTUS. President of the United States, POTUS is the POTUS. And they had all the public affairs officers lined up. And he was the president was very pleased that we communicated that strategic message from inside the Pentagon. And he wanted to come over and thank us for that. So they lined us all up. And I'm captain player at the time. There was a couple of folks in front of me, including Colonel Rindance. And the colonel and the president are talking, and Colonel Rindance says, yeah, that's captain player right there. And the president's like, oh, I guess he can't wait to be a major player. And he gets to me, and I say, sir, you can change that. You know that, right? and he had a chuckle out of it. He said, I'm sure I'll see you again. Don't worry about it. Great job. I know you can't wait to be a major player. I said, hey, sir, you can do something about it. And
you're the only person I know that gets promoted to colonel, and it's a demotion because you're no longer a major player anymore. You're a colonel player.
Indeed. So, but thank you, Zach. I appreciate it. It was a labor of love, and like I said, I've received tremendous feedback from civilians, from sailors, from Marines, and especially from public affairs officers. So,
well, thank you, sir, and I appreciate you talking about September 11th because that brings us to the end of today's episode where we dedicate our episode to one of our fallen brothers or sisters. For me, September 11th was a very difficult day for the exact opposite reasons it was a difficult day for you. And that was, I had turned in my uniform a couple of years earlier. And one of the reasons I left the Marine Corps was because I never got deployed. I never got a chance to fight. I never got a chance to practice the craft that I had worked so hard on. And all of a sudden, September 11th happens. And I wanted to raise my hand to go help out, and I couldn't because I was out of uniform at that point in time. And my wife gave me the good old ultimatum. It's either her or the Marine Corps. So what I did do is I joined our local volunteer fire department after that. And the main reason I did that was because I was in a reserve infantry unit. It was 1st Battalion, 24th Marines. We were a cold weather infantry weapons battalion based up in Toledo. Our sister unit was 325 based in Columbus, Ohio, just a few miles south from us. It was a infantry unit. And specifically, Lima Company, at the very early stages of the war, lost 23 Marines within one operation. It was one of the largest losses of life I think we had up until since Vietnam. Those Marines were my fellow reserves, and I, in some ways, feel that I left a hole in that unit, and they plugged that gap. I went to several of those funerals, saw many flag draft coffins of my brothers that were the same age that could have been me. And so there's a connection I have to them, and I hope I'm honoring their memory by then picking up the new arms of being an axe and being a firefighter and carrying on that tradition. So with that, I dedicate it to Lima Company of the 325 Marines.
Outstanding.
Well, as we finish up all of our podcasts, we'd like to say,
Semper Fidelis.
Thank you, sir.